Oh, for God's sake!
Piss off!
Hello Grumpies, greetings from the Shadowbound dimension. This is our most watched episodes video for the Jon Pertwee Doctor, the first Doctor of Colour, though for most of the audience he was still a black and white Doctor, as the majority of the audience didn't have a coloured telly yet. These are the most watched episodes of each of Jon's stories, the ones the Normies watched as they dipped in and out. This is your next viewing marathon, giving you a Normie's eye view of Doctor Who. Other Grumpy, it's over to you. Thanks, current Grumpy. Now, just before we get started, I want to sidebar for a minute. The most watched episode of Bill Hartnell's final story, The 10th Planet, was episode 3. The most watched episode of Patrick Troughton's last story, The War Games, was episode 2. Have a guess at what's going to be the most watched episode of Pertwee's final story. Got an idea what it might be? Well, keep watching and you'll find out what it is. So, the most watched episodes of Jon Year 1 are Spearhead from Space, Episode 1, Doctor Who and the Silurians, which should just be called The Silurians, Episode 1, Ambassadors of Death, Episode 4, and my personal favourite, Inferno, Episode 4. Jon Year 2, the 4th episode of Terror of the Autons, the 2nd episode of The Mind of Evil, the 2nd episode of The Claws of Exos, the 3rd episode of Colony in Space, and the 1st episode of The Demons. Jon Year 3, Day of the Daleks, Episode 2, Curse of Peladon, Episode 2, The Sea Devils, Episode 2, The Mutants, Episode 1, and The Time Monster, Episode 3. Jon Year 4, the 4th episode of The Three Doctors, the 2nd episode of Carnival of Monsters, the 1st episode of Frontier in Space, the 1st episode of Planet of the Daleks, and the 1st episode of The Green Death. And Jon Year 5, his last year as the Doctor. The Time Warrior, Episode 4, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, Episode 1, Death to the Daleks, Episode 3, Monster the Peladon, Episode 1, and Planet of the Spiders, his last story, the most watched episode, was Episode 1. So again, the final episode of a Doctor's final story wasn't the most watched episode. Instead, for Hartnell, it was Episode 3, for Pat, it was Episode 2, and now for Jon, it's Episode 1. So, Normies really don't care about regenerations. Next time, it's the Tom Baker Doctor. Until then, resist the Marxists, don't be a sheep, and stay grumpy.
Fuck off!